In the heart of the Black Fong Dominion, a king battles a curse that devours his kingdom and his soul. But when a mysterious maid's touch ignites an ancient light, a fated bond awakens, pulling them into a web of secrets, jealousy, and destiny. Will love seal the darkness? Or unleash it forever? Stick around. The moon goddess has secrets that will shatter everything you think you know. Welcome back, Lunar-bound lovers. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join the pack. We drop epic fantasy romances every week that tug at your heartstrings and spark your wildest dreams. Don't miss out on the magic. Chapter 1. A Touch of Starlight. The stone balcony of the moon would keep was cold beneath King Aldrich Thornevale's palms. He barely felt it. His entire focus was on the horizon, where a creeping violet-tinged gloom slithered through the sacred silverwood forests of his kingdom. The Blight. A living, breathing curse that devoured light and life, inching closer every day. It was a mirror of the affliction crawling up his own right arm. Beneath the sleeve of his finely woven tunic, a pattern of dark, pulsing veins spread like poisoned roots, a constant, throbbing reminder of his failure to protect his land. His wolf, a restless presence in his soul, paced and snarled. Failure. Weakness. A soft knock at the chamber door broke his grim reverie. Enter, he commanded, his voice a low rumble. The door opened to reveal a young woman he'd seen only in passing. A new maid, her head bowed, a carafe of moonberry wine in her hands. She moved with a quiet grace that was at odds with the usual bustling servants. Her name, he recalled distantly, was Celine. Your wine, your majesty, she murmured, her voice like the whisper of wind through pine needles. He grunted in acknowledgement, turning back to the window, the pain in his arm sharpening into a hot spike. He squeezed the stone railing, his knuckles white. A sudden shuffle. A gasp. The clatter of the silver carafe hitting the floor. He turned, irritation flaring, to find her there, frozen. She had stumbled. Her hand splayed against his bare forearm where he had rolled up his sleeve to cool the feverish skin. And the world stopped. A jolt, not of pain, but of pure undiluted sensation shot through him. It was not an electric shock, but a wave of liquid moonlight, warm and soothing. From her fingertips, a silvery light bloomed, so bright it illuminated the dim room. It raced up his arm, and as it touched the vile violet blight, the darkness recoiled. The pain, the constant grinding agony that had been his shadow for months, vanished. Completely. For one breathtaking, impossible second, his arm was whole again, the skin clear, the muscle relaxed. His gaze snapped to hers. Her eyes, wide with terror, were not the simple brown he'd assumed. They were the color of a twilight sky, shot through with flecks of silver that seemed to swirl with the same otherworldly light that had just healed him. In their depths, he saw not just fear, but a shocking profound recognition that echoed the primal howl rising in his own chest. Mate. The word was a thunderclap in his soul. His wolf, which had been snarling in pain moments before, now fell utterly silent, then let out a single awestruck whine. She snatched her hand back as if burned, the light dying instantly. The blight slowly seeped back into his skin, the pain returning with a dull, vengeful throb. But the memory of its absence was seared into him. I am so sorry, your majesty, she stammered, dropping into a deep curtsy, her face pale as parchment. I'll fetch a cloth. She fled, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving behind only the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the ghost of her healing touch. Aldrich stood rooted to the spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the closed door, then down at his arm, where the echo of her power still tingled on his skin. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the Dominion, a male who had never known a sensation he could not control, was utterly and completely captivated. He walked to his desk, the weight of the crown feeling heavier and lighter all at once. He pressed a button, summoning his steward. The new maid, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Celine. Assign her as my personal attendant. Effective immediately. As the steward bowed and left to carry out the order, Aldrich turned to stare out at the encroaching blight once more. But this time, he wasn't looking at the decay. He was looking for a glimmer of starlight in the shadows. He leaned his head against the cold glass of the window, his wolf finally calm, its focus singular and absolute. Who are you? He whispered into the silent, waiting dark. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Moonlight. Celine moved through the library like a ghost, her footsteps silent, her heart loud in her ears. The castle's vast collection of books called to her, especially the ones on ancient wards and forgotten magic. She pulled a heavy volume from the shelf, its spine cracking with age, and flipped to a page marked with a silver ribbon. Her fingers traced an intricate symbol, a spiraling ward used by her ancestors to seal the most dangerous entities. As her fingertips slid over the ink, a soft, silvery glow emanated from her skin, illuminating the page. The light danced upward, curling around her wrist like a lover's touch. She stared at it, her heart aching with a memory of Aldrich's arm beneath her hand. The way his pain had vanished, the way his eyes had burned into hers. "You're glowing again," came a voice low and smooth from the shadows. She froze, panic tightening her chest. Slowly, she turned to see Aldrich standing in the doorway, his broad frame silhouetted by the moonlight. He wore no crown tonight. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty," she whispered, snapping the book shut and clutching it to her chest. The glow faded instantly. I didn't mean to disturb." "You're not disturbing anything," he interrupted, stepping fully into the room. His wolf scent, wildfire and winter, was sharper tonight, more primal. "What were you reading?" She hesitated, her mind racing for an excuse. "Just an old book about wards. I thought, perhaps it might help with the blight." He tilted his head, his amber eyes piercing. "You think you can find answers where my scholars have failed?" She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening on the book. I don't know. But I had to try." There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice softer. "Sit with me." It wasn't a command, but it wasn't a request either. It was something in between, a gentle dominance that left no room for refusal. She nodded and moved to the small reading nook by the window. He followed, sitting across from her, his presence large enough to fill the room even as he made himself still, unthreatening. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I? I'm part of this kingdom too. Even if I am just a maid." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You're more than that, Celine. I think you know it, and I think I'm beginning to see it too." Her breath hitched. She looked away, her eyes catching on the moonlit gardens outside the window. "You're wrong, Your Majesty. I'm just someone trying to do what's right." He watched her for a long moment, then sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Do you know what it's like to carry the weight of an entire kingdom? To feel like every decision you make could destroy the people you're supposed to protect?" She looked back at him, her expression softening. "I can't imagine it. But I do know what it's like to feel like you're carrying something that could break you if you let it." He frowned, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What are you carrying?" She hesitated but found herself answering despite her better judgment. "Loss. Guilt. A duty I can't escape." He nodded, as if her words resonated deeply with him. "Sometimes I think the crown is less a privilege and more a prison," he admitted quietly. "There's no one I can truly trust, no one who sees me as anything more than a king." Her heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing his forearm. The faintest silver glow sparked where their skin touched. "I see you," she whispered. His eyes widened, and for a moment, the air between them was electric, alive with something neither could name. But before either could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Celine pulled her hand back, the glow fading. Aldrich straightened, his expression shifting back to its usual stoic mask. Raven Thornvale appeared in the doorway, her sharp gaze flickering between Aldrich and Celine. "Brother," she said, her tone casual but her eyes calculating. "I've been looking for you." Aldrich rose, his demeanor cool. "What is it?" Raven stepped further into the room, her gaze landing on Celine. "A word in private?" Aldrich nodded, though his jaw tightened slightly. He glanced at Celine. "We'll continue this later." She nodded, clutching the book to her chest as he and Raven left the library. The moment they were gone, she exhaled shakily, her knees weak. Fenric, her wolf spirit, materialized beside her, his silver fur glowing faintly in the moonlight. Chapter 3. The Calm Before the Storm. Celine sat on a stone bench in the Moonwood Gardens, her fingers absently tracing the petals of a silver weed blossom. The flower glowed faintly under her touch, a soft, ethereal light that matched the ache in her heart. The conversation with Aldrich in the library lingered in her mind. The way his presence had felt both comforting and overwhelming. She couldn't shake the image of his amber eyes, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed beneath his kingly mask. A rustle of fabric behind her made her turn. Aldrich stood there, his dark cloak blending with the night. In his hands, he held something small and delicate, a silver comb, its surface intricately carved with the crescent moon symbol of his house. "I saw this in the market," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet garden. "It reminded me of you." She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "Your Majesty, Please," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. "Just Aldrich. At least here in this moment." She nodded, her throat tight. He moved behind her, his presence warm and solid. Gently, he took a strand of her dark silken hair and began to braid it. His fingers deft and surprisingly tender. The comb slid through her hair like water, its cool metal contrasting with the heat of his touch. Celine closed her eyes, her breath catching. It was an intimate act, a gesture that spoke of care and possession all at once. In wolf culture, an alpha braiding a female's hair was a sign of courtship, of claiming. She knew he understood the weight of the gesture, and yet he did it anyway. Her wolf, which had been quiet and cautious, stirred in her chest, a low longing whine escaping its throat. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to silence it, but the feeling only deepened. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He paused, his hands stilling in her hair. "Because you're unlike anyone I've ever known," he said simply. "And because, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not alone." She turned to look at him, her twilight eyes meeting his amber ones. For a moment, the world outside the garden ceased to exist. It was just them, the moonlight, and the unspoken bond growing between them like a seedling in the dark. Later, Celine seeks guidance from the high priestess, Elora Duskveil. The temple is a place of quiet power, its walls carved with ancient symbols that seem to hum faintly. Elora stood before the altar of the moon goddess, her hands clasped as if in prayer. When Celine entered, the priestess turned, her calm, knowing gaze settling on her. "You've come to me for answers," Elora said, her voice like the rustle of leaves in the wind. "But I think you already know what this bond means." Celine swallowed hard. "Is it real? The bond between us?" "It is," Elora confirmed, stepping closer. "The moon goddess has woven your souls together. But this bond is not without its dangers, child. The prison beneath this kingdom weakens with each passing day, and Aldrich's blood is the key. Your light is the only lock that can hold it shut." Celine's hands trembled. "What happens if it breaks?" "Chaos," Elora said simply. "The darkness will consume everything. Him, you, the entire kingdom. You must guard your heart, Celine. The bond strengthens with emotion, and the more you feel for him, the more the prison cracks." That night, Celine has a vivid, terrifying nightmare. She sees Aldrich, his eyes black as obsidian, his body wreathed in shadows. He stands at the edge of a vast, crumbling chasm, the blight swirling around him like a living thing. In the distance, the castle burns, the silver forest withers, and the people scream. She tries to reach him, but her light is swallowed by the darkness. Celine woke with a gasp, her body drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The glow of her magic was faint, almost extinguished. She clutched the silver comb Aldrich had given her, her fingers trembling. The next day, the tension comes to a head in the market. Aldrich watches from the shadows as Celine approaches a hooded figure. The figure hands her a glowing crystal, their voices too low to hear. Aldrich's wolf snarls, jealousy and suspicion rising like a storm in his chest. "Who was that?" Aldrich demanded, stepping out of the shadows, his voice sharp and cold. Celine turned, her eyes wide with alarm. "Your Majesty." "Don't," he snapped, his jaw clenched. "Who was that? And why are you meeting them in secret?" She swallowed, her mind racing for an explanation. But before she could speak, he turned and walked away, his wolf's growl echoing in her ears. Chapter 4. The Jealous Heart. The scent of the market, of dust, spices, and that hooded stranger, clung to Aldrich's senses, poisoning the air. But it was Celine's scent, that intoxicating blend of night-blooming jasmine and pure moonlight, now tainted with secrecy, that made his wolf snarl. The image was burned behind his eyes. Her reaching for another, accepting a token in the shadows. Mine, the beast inside him growled, a possessive primal sound. But is she? A colder, more rational part whispered. Or have you been a fool? He had given her a piece of his trust, a sliver of his vulnerable self in the moonlit library. He had braided her hair, an act so intimate it still made his fingers tingle with the memory of her silken strands. And she had repaid him with clandestine meetings. The door to his chamber opened with a soft click. He didn't need to turn to know it was her. Her presence was a change in the atmosphere, a pull on the fragile thread that had begun to weave between them. Tonight, the thread felt like a tripwire. You summoned me, Your Majesty? Celine's voice was quiet, carefully neutral. Aldrich turned slowly. He had schooled his features into a mask of icy calm, but his eyes, glowing faintly with amber fire, betrayed the storm within. He saw her flinch under his gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her simple maid's dress. The market was busy today, he began, his voice dangerously soft. He took a step toward her. I saw many things. She said nothing, but her throat worked as she swallowed. The silence stretched, feeding his suspicions. I saw you, he continued, closing the distance between them until he loomed over her. His dominance wasn't a weapon he wielded often, but now he let it roll off him in waves, a palpable force meant to intimidate, to demand the truth. Speaking with a hooded figure. Exchanging. What was it? A message? Payment. It's not what you think, she whispered, her eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also a desperate sorrow. Then enlighten me, Celine. His voice cracked like a whip in the quiet room. Who was that? He saw the wall go up behind her eyes. It was a subtle shift, a retreat into some inner sanctuary he could not reach. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I cannot say. The 4 words were a dagger to his heart. Cannot. Not will not. It implied a duty, a loyalty to something, or someone, else that superseded her loyalty to him. Cannot, he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. Or will not. Are you a spy, Celine? Sent to weaken me with your light. He grabbed his right arm, where the blight scar throbbed in time with his pounding heart. Was this all a ruse? A way to get close to the king? Her head snapped up, true pain flashing in her twilight eyes. No. Aldrich, I would never. It's Your Majesty. He corrected her coldly, the formality a brutal weapon. The intimacy of the garden was gone, shattered. Your silence speaks volumes. You are dismissed. For a long moment, she stood frozen, tears welling but not falling. He could feel the fracture between them, a sickening crack in the world. Then, without another word, she turned and fled, the door closing with a finality that echoed in the hollow chamber. The moment she was gone, the icy control shattered. Aldrich slammed his fist onto the heavy oak desk, the wood splintering under the force. A roar of pure anguish tore from his throat. The pain in his arm erupted, a searing, vicious agony that stole his breath. He ripped back his sleeve. The violet blight which had receded after her touch was now crawling past his elbow, darker and more malevolent than before. It pulsed with a sickly light, as if feeding on his jealousy and despair. He slumped into his chair, cradling his arm, the physical pain a perfect mirror of the tear in his soul. The bond, so new and fragile, hadn't just strained. It had broken. And in the silence of his room, the king who had just begun to hope was left with nothing but the cold, dark certainty of betrayal. Chapter 5. Into the Whisper Marsh. The silence in the castle had become a physical weight for Aldrich. For 2 days, he had endured the gnawing emptiness where Celine's presence used to be. His arm was a constant, throbbing inferno, the blight feeding on his bitter heartache. When his elite guard, Kale, reported in a hushed tone that Celine had been seen heading toward the Whisper Marsh, a place where the very air was poison and the ground swallowed the unwary. This was it. The proof of her betrayal. A grim, cold resolve settled over him. He would see this for himself. He would confront the truth, no matter how much it destroyed him. He followed her scent trail, a predator stalking his prey. The vibrant silverwoods gave way to gnarled, gray-barked trees. The air grew thick and heavy, the cheerful birdsong replaced by an unsettling, distant whispering that gave the marsh its name. The tendrils of ground mist seemed to coil around his boots like possessive fingers. His wolf was a snarling, jealous beast in his chest. She meets another. She is not ours. He moved with a lethal grace, his senses hyper-alert. He expected to find a clandestine camp, the hooded figure, and a plot laid bare. What he found was an abomination. In a small, desolate clearing, the very fabric of the world was torn. A jagged rift, pulsing with the same violet energy as the blight on his arm, hovered a foot above the boggy water. From it, inky black tendrils lashed out, corrupting everything they touched. The reeds they brushed withered into black dust. And in the center of it all was Celine. But it was not the Celine he knew. The simple maid's dress was gone, replaced by form-fitting leather armor that gleamed with a soft, internal light. Her braid, the one he had woven, was a silver whip behind her as she moved, not with a servant's deference, but with the fluid, deadly precision of a master warrior. Her hands were not clasped in submission. They were weapons. Blazing with a pure, silvery light he had come to crave, she fought the shadows. Each movement was a dance of light and darkness. She would block a lashing tendril with a shield of solidified moonlight, her movements a breathtaking blend of power and grace. Aldrich stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, his jealousy evaporating into the toxic air, replaced by a staggering, humbling awe. With a final guttural cry, she slammed her palms together and then thrust them toward the rift. A torrent of starlight erupted from her, slamming into the fissure. The tendrils recoiled, the violet pulse stuttered, and the tear in the world sealed with a sound like a sigh. The oppressive weight in the clearing lessened. The glow around her faded, and she slumped forward, breathing heavily. She sensed him then, her head snapping up. Her eyes were not just glowing, they were blazing with an ancient, formidable power, holding echoes of ages past. Her gaze pinned him, stripped him of his crown and his anger, leaving only the raw, vulnerable man beneath. "The blight is not an invasion, Aldrich," she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but resonant, echoing with layers of power. "It is a symptom." She turned to face him fully, her expression not one of guilt, but of grim, weary duty. "Your kingdom is built on a prison that holds an ancient evil." She gestured to the now sealed ground. "These rifts are cracks in its cage. The darker they grow in the land, the closer it comes to waking." She took a step toward him, her warden's aura radiating an authority that rivaled his own. "And my bloodline are its wardens. I am not here to serve you as a king." She held his gaze, unflinching. "I am here to ensure your bloodline never becomes the key that unlocks it." The ground beneath Aldrich's feet felt less solid than the marsh. Every assumption, every moment of jealousy, every cold word he had spoken, it had all been a grotesque misunderstanding. He had accused his protector of being his betrayer. The woman who held the only lock was the one he had pushed away. The pain in his arm was nothing compared to the shattering realization of his own tragic error. Chapter 6. The weight of a silence in the Whisper Marsh had been a verdict. Celine moved through the castle corridors like a phantom, the memory of Aldrich's horrified realization burning behind her eyes. He knew. He knew she was a warden, a guardian, a living lock. Not a woman. Not a potential queen. A function. A duty. The memory of his face, the anger replaced by a kind of wounded shock, was more painful than any confrontation. She had failed. Not in her duty, the rift was sealed, but in the one thing she hadn't known she wanted until she felt its warmth. His trust, his hope. Now, all she had left was the duty. Fenric, her wolf spirit, materialized beside her, his form faint, his usual silver glow dimmed by her sorrow. "You cannot run from a fated bond, little star." "I can try," she whispered, her voice raw. He looks at me now and sees a chain. A reminder that his crown, his home, his very blood is a curse. Her voice broke. I showed him the rot at the root of his legacy. How could he ever look at me again and see me? She folded the simple, woven dress she had worn the day she first touched him. A single traitorous tear traced a path down her cheek, and where it fell onto the wooden floorboard, a tiny frost-like crystal bloomed. Her magic, once a vibrant river, was now a choked stream, clouded by heartache. Cut to Aldrich's chambers. The room is in disarray. A chair lay overturned. Papers were scattered across the floor. He stood in the center of the wreckage, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloody from where they had met the stone wall. The truth was not a key. It was a blade, and it had gutted him. He stared at his reflection in a large, cracked mirror. The king. The alpha. A lie. His entire life, every victory, every law, every breath had been drawn atop a tomb. The blight was not some external foe to be conquered. It was the slow, inevitable seepage of the evil his ancestors had foolishly, arrogantly, buried. My blood is the key. The thought was a relentless drumbeat in his skull. He was the problem. The threat. And she was the solution. The warden. A knock at the door. Brother. Raven's voice, laced with a concern she rarely showed. Leave. Aldrich roared, the sound so raw it tore at his throat. He couldn't face her. He couldn't face anyone. The weight of the crown, which he had borne with such resolve, now felt like a leaden cage. Raven entered anyway, her sharp eyes taking in the destruction. Aldrich, talk to me. What happened in the marsh? He turned on her, his eyes wild, the amber light flickering like a dying flame. Everything we've built, this dynasty. It's a monument built on a grave. Our strength is a phantom. Our legacy is a prison. He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. And I accused her. I drove her away with my blindness. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Get out. Raven hesitated, then silently retreated, closing the door on his isolation. Selene walks through the castle gates as the sun begins to set, casting long, sorrowful shadows. She doesn't look back. In the courtyard, Cale Dernhardt watched her go, his expression grim. He had been the hooded figure, the supplier of the moonstones she needed to fortify her seals. He saw the heartbreak in her posture and felt a surge of protective anger toward his king. The bond was frayed, a golden thread stretched so thin it was on the verge of snapping. Back in his chamber, Aldrich slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor. The physical pain in his arm was now a constant, raging fire, a punishment for his failure to see, to trust. They were both exiles now. He in his palace of lies, she in the wild. The chasm between them, once bridged by tentative touches and whispered confidences, now seemed wider and darker than the rift in the marsh. Chapter 7. The First Thread. The silence in the castle had festered for 3 days. It was a living thing, thick with regret and the phantom scent of jasmine. Aldrich had become a ghost in his own halls. His presence a dark storm cloud that servants and courtiers scurried to avoid. In his study, he stared at the silver comb on his desk, a relic of a moment of pure connection now twisted by his own hand. The pain in his arm was an unending scream. The door opened without ceremony. Raven stood there, her arms crossed, her expression one of severe practicality. Behind her stood Cale Dernhardt, his usual stoic mask firmly in place. You cannot remain in here, brother, Raven stated, her voice cutting through the heavy air. The kingdom suffers. The blight advances faster than ever. You are not the only one who has lost something. Aldrich didn't look up. You don't understand. Then make us understand. Cale's voice was low, but it carried a new weight. You saw me in the market with Selene. Aldrich's head snapped up, a fresh wave of bitter jealousy surging. So it was you. It was, Cale confirmed, stepping fully into the room. He met Aldrich's glare without flinching. I was supplying her with purified moonstones. They are the only things that can temporarily fortify the ancient seals. She came to me because I am one of the few who knows how to source them without attracting attention. He paused, letting the implication settle. She wasn't betraying you, my king. She was trying to save you. To save all of us. The admission landed not as an accusation, but as a cleaving blow. The hooded figure was not a rival, but his own most loyal warrior, aiding his destined mate in a sacred duty. Aldrich's narrative of betrayal crumbled to dust, revealing an uglier truth. His own insecurity, his own lack of trust, had been the true poison. She is the warden, Raven said softly, her tone shifting from frustration to empathy. She wasn't a secret to be kept from you, Aldrich. She was a truth you refused to see. Aldrich looked from Raven's knowing gaze to Cale's unwavering loyalty. The jealousy that had felt so righteous now seemed petty, foolish, and catastrophic. The fight went out of him. The anger that had been his shield dissolved, leaving only the raw, exposed wound of his mistake. He had been so focused on the potential of her betraying his heart. He had blinded himself to the fact that she was protecting his very soul. The collapse was complete. Later, in the temple of the moon goddess. The air is fragrant with incense. Celine kneels before the altar, her head bowed. Elora Duskveil stands beside her, a calming presence. "The bond is not broken, child," Elora murmured, placing a hand on Celine's shoulder. "It is wounded, but it can be healed." "He hates what I am," Celine whispered, her voice thick. "The truth of me destroyed the man he thought he was." "Perhaps," Elora conceded. "Or perhaps it is the only thing that can make him whole." The great oak door of the temple creaked open. Aldrich stood there, silhouetted against the twilight. He was not wearing his royal regalia, just a simple tunic. He looked younger, stripped bare. He walked toward them, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He did not look at Elora. His entire world had narrowed to the woman whose back was to him, whose sorrow he could feel as acutely as the pain in his own arm. He did not command. He did not demand. He crossed the stone floor and before Celine, the Alpha King of the Black Fang Dominion, went down on one knee. Celine turned, her eyes wide with shock. To see him in such a posture of supplication was more shocking than any display of his power. She expected anger, coldness, a king's dismissal. Instead, he looked up at her, his amber eyes clear for the first time, filled with a devastating and open regret. "I was jealous of a duty I should have revered," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the holy space. "I saw a threat where there was only devotion." He swallowed, the sound loud in the silence. "I have been a fool." Celine could only stare, her breath caught in her throat. "My anger was a shield for my hurt," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "And in my fear, I broke the very thing that could save us." He reached out not to grab, but to offer his hand palm up. The blight scar on his arm looked livid and painful. "The burden you carry alone is too great," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Teach me. Let me help you bear it. Not as your king, but as the man who should have seen you from the beginning." Tears welled in Celine's eyes, spilling over as she looked down at his offered hand. The silver glow of her magic flickered faintly, responding to the vulnerability in his posture. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a soft, silvery light bloomed between them, chasing away the shadows of the temple. It wasn't a full healing, not yet, but it was a thread, the first fragile connection reweaving their bond. Elora stepped back silently, a small smile of approval on her lips, as the light enveloped the kneeling king and the standing warden. For the first time in days, hope flickered in the sacred space, a single thread pulling them back from the brink. Chapter 8. The History of Shadows. The air in the archive was thick with the scent of aged parchment and regret. For the first hour, the only sounds were the soft rustle of turning pages and the weight of unspoken words. Aldrich worked with a grim focus, his movements still stiff with a lingering ghost of his shame. Celine was a quiet presence, her touch gentle on the fragile texts, her glow a subdued silver in the dim light. It was Celine who found it. Her breath hitched, a soft sound that drew Aldrich's gaze immediately. She was staring at a cracked leather-bound journal, its pages filled with a frantic, sloping script. "This is your ancestors," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The first Thornvale king." He didn't know. Aldrich moved around the table to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. A jolt, faint but unmistakable, passed between them. He looked down at the page she indicated. "The voice in the earth promised prosperity. It showed me visions of a kingdom that would stand for 1,000 years, its foundations blessed by the mountain itself. I was a fool, blinded by ambition. I did not realize I was not building on a blessing, but on a seal. The blessing was the lock and my bloodline. My bloodline is the key it seeks to turn." Aldrich read the words again, his chest tightening. The truth was not a condemnation of his legacy, but a tragedy. His ancestor wasn't a villain. He was the first victim, tricked by the very evil he had unknowingly imprisoned. The weight on his shoulders lightened by a fraction. The sin was not in his blood, but in a deception that had spanned generations. "He was betrayed," Aldrich murmured, the words a revelation. "Just as I almost betrayed you." Celine looked up at him. In the mage light, her eyes were soft, the hurt in them beginning to be replaced by a fragile understanding. The entity preys on fear and ambition. It twists them. As he spoke, his hand rested on the table next to hers. Slowly, tentatively, Celine reached out and placed her fingertips over the angry, darkened veins on his wrist. The effect was instantaneous. The silvery light bloomed from her touch, warm and soothing. It wasn't the brilliant flash of their first contact, but a gentle, persistent glow that seeped into his skin. The agonizing, constant throb in his arm receded, not vanishing entirely, but softening to a dull, manageable ache. He let out a shuddering breath, his eyes closing for a moment in sheer relief. When he opened them, he found her watching him, her expression full of a tenderness that stole the air from his lungs. The physical connection was a bridge, and across it, their wounded bond began to send out the first, delicate tendrils of repair. He turned his hand, his fingers gently lacing with hers. Their joined hands glowed brighter on the ancient text, a symbol of a new alliance written in light over the old words of despair. "We have to stop it," he said, his voice firm now, cleansed of its earlier doubt. "Not as a king and his warden, but together." Driven by this new unity, their search became more fervent. It was Aldrich who found the reference, in an astronomical chart tucked inside a book of prophecies. He pointed to a complex diagram of converging celestial paths. "The nexus alignment," he said, his voice grave. "It happens once every 500 years. The stars and moons align in such a way that all magical barriers are at their weakest." Celine studied the chart, her warden's knowledge clicking into place. "That's when the prison will be most vulnerable. The entity will use all its power to break free." She looked from the chart to him, a plan solidifying in her eyes. "We can't just defend. We have to reinforce the seal at the exact moment of the alignment, using a countercurrent of power. But the ritual, it requires absolute trust, a complete synergy between the lock and the key." She met his gaze, the stakes clear in her twilight eyes. "Your bloodline is the key, but it doesn't have to unlock the door. It can be used to turn the lock, to strengthen it forever. But we have to be perfectly in sync. If our bond falters for even a second..." She didn't need to finish. The consequence was the end of everything. Aldrich squeezed her hand, the light around their clasped fingers flaring in response. "It won't falter," he vowed, his voice low and steady. "I will not fail you again." For the first time since the Whisper Marsh, a flicker of hope, delicate as a seedling, began to grow in the dark, dusty archive. Chapter 9. A Bond Reforged. The Nexus alignment was 2 nights away. The plan was set, the ancient texts memorized. But the ritual's success hinged on a variable no book could guarantee: the strength of their bond. It required more than cooperation. It demanded a perfect, fearless fusion of his essence and hers. Elora had guided them to the grove. Her instructions simple and grave. "You must learn to speak without words. To let your magics dance as one, not as master and servant, but as partners. The ritual is a marriage of powers. Practice that marriage tonight." Now they stood facing each other in the center of the grove, a span of soft grass between them. The memory of their last intimate moment here, the gentle pull of the comb, the unspoken promise, hung in the air, a ghost they had to appease. "Where do we begin?" Aldrich asked, his voice softer than she had heard it in weeks. He had shed his royal demeanor like a heavy cloak. Here he was just Aldrich. A man, a wolf, a key. Celine took a steadying breath. "We begin with trust. The ritual requires a mingling of our essences. Your bloodline's connection to the prison, and my light, which is the lock." She extended her hands, palms up. "You must let me in, Aldrich. Not as your king, but as my partner. And I must do the same." He looked at her hands, then into her eyes, and without hesitation, he placed his palms against hers. The contact was electric but different this time. It was not the shocking jolt of discovery, nor the pained connection of healing. It was a current, a circuit completing. A soft silver light emanated from Celine, while a deep thrumming amber glow, the color of his wolf's eyes, rose from Aldrich. "Now breathe with me," she instructed, her voice a hypnotic rhythm. "In and out. Let your magic follow your breath." At first, the lights flickered uncertainly, the silver and amber swirling like oil and water. Aldrich's jaw was tight, the alpha in him instinctively resisting the surrender of control. The amber light flared, threatening to overpower the silver. "Don't command it," Celine whispered, her eyes closed in concentration. "Invite it. Your power is not a weapon to be wielded against mine. It is a song. Sing with me." He closed his eyes, forcing his shoulders to relax, his breathing to deepen. He focused not on the magic, but on her. On the feel of her palms against his, on the scent of jasmine and moonlight, on the memory of her unwavering loyalty in the face of his accusations. He thought of her strength in the marsh, her sorrow in the temple. He let down his guard. And then it happened. Their magic ceased to fight. The silver and amber light swirled together, weaving into a beautiful luminous braid of energy that climbed up their arms, encircling them in a cocoon of shared power. It was warm, exhilarating, a sense of wholeness so profound it was almost dizzying. Celine gasped, her eyes flying open to see their intertwined light painting the grove in ethereal colors. Aldrich opened his eyes, and the look he gave her stole her breath. It held no trace of kingly condescension or jealous suspicion. It was pure, unadulterated awe-respect, and a love so deep it needed no words. The braided light pulsed gently around them, a living testament to their reconciliation. "You are my destined partner, Celine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "In this and in all things." The word partner landed in her soul with the weight of a vow. It was a promise of equality, of a shared throne, a shared life, a shared destiny. But as their bonded light reached its brightest, illuminating the grove like a small star, a tremor passed through the earth. It was subtle, a deep, subterranean groan that was felt more than heard. The joyful, braided light around them flickered. From the direction of the castle, a wave of pure icy malice washed over them, a psychic backlash so potent it made the silverwood leaves shudder and curl. The tranquil atmosphere shattered. The entity had felt their union. It sensed the threat of their reforged bond. The warm, braided light dissolved, and Aldrich's grip on Celine's hands tightened, not in fear, but in a fierce protective resolve. His eyes met hers, the earlier softness replaced by the hard glint of a warrior. "It knows," Celine whispered, a chill tracing her spine. The peaceful practice was over. The war for their very world had just begun. Chapter 10. The Final Seal. The air crackled with dissonant energy. Chapter 10. The Nexus alignment didn't feel like a celestial event. The air crackled with dissonant energy. It felt like the world holding its breath. The Nexus alignment didn't feel like a celestial event. It felt like the world holding its breath. Rhythmic pounding had begun. The very laws of magic straining at their seams. The imprisoned entity below their growing feet, stronger with each rhythmic pounding had begun. Elora, the heartbeat of the imprisoned entity, stood at the perimeter of the runic circle. With each passing moment. Their faces grim. Elora, they were the guardians of this ritual. Stood at the perimeter of the runic circle. Their shield against any physical interference. They were the guardians of this ritual. Would be fought within the circle. Their presence a shield against any physical interference. But her voice barely a whisper yet carrying perfectly in the charged silence, Celine said. "It will try to break us." Her voice barely a whisper yet carrying perfectly in the charged silence. Aldrich nodded, his jaw set. "It will try to break us." He took her hands. "It will use our fears. Then we will remind it what we have overcome." His jaw set. As the peak of the alignment hit, then a column of violent purple energy erupted from the ground between them. As the peak of the alignment hit, them apart. A column of violent purple energy erupted from the ground between them. But instead of a physical attack, it became a psychic onslaught, making its bid for freedom. But instead of a physical attack, it became a psychic onslaught, woven from his own deepest insecurities. The voice was inside his head. Vivid images flooded his mind. Celine from his own deepest insecurities. Vivid images flooded his mind. Celine in the market, laughing with Kale. Not as a warden, but as a spy. From him in the library, her eyes cold as she plunged a dagger of shadow into his heart. Not as a warden, she pities you, the voice hissed. Her eyes cold as she plunged a dagger of shadow into his heart. Needing a maid to save him, the voice hissed. She will always see the mighty fool you were. Brought low. Can you truly trust her to save him? Or are you just a tool for her power? See the jealous fool you were. Asterisk. Can you truly trust her? Gasped. Or are you just a tool for her power? The amber glow of his magic flickered. Aldrich gasped. Tainted at the edges with purple-black corruption. The amber glow of his magic flickered with fresh agony. Tainted at the edges with purple-black corruption. It was weaponizing his memory of his own fresh agony. The entity was right. Celine cried out. It was weaponizing his memory of his own as she fought to hold the ritual circle against the erupting dark energy. Celine cried out. Her silver light blazing as she fought to hold the ritual circle against the erupting dark images of her betrayal. It's a lie. But through the psychic assault, he saw the real Celine swimming with the false images of her betrayal. Her eyes pleading with him, full of faith, he saw the real Celine. Her face strained with effort, not of his pleading with him, but of his surrender, not deceit. With a roar that was part anguish, part defiance. Not of his strength, Aldrich made his surrender. He stopped fighting the dark anguish, part defiance. Instead, he turned made his choice toward the bond. He stopped fighting the dark beautiful braided light they had created in the grove. He turned inward. He opened himself to it completely. The fragile, beautiful braided light they had created in the grove. He opened himself to it completely. It was the
Celine,
ultimate act of
he
trust.
gasped, his voice
He
raw.
dropped every defense, every
use me.
instinct to dominate
It was
and
the
control.
ultimate act of trust.
He submitted.
He dropped
not to
every
an enemy,
defense,
but to
every
her.
instinct to
To their
dominate and
bond.
control.
Understanding
He
flashed in her
not
eyes.
to an enemy.
She
but
didn't
to
command
her.
his power.
To their bond.
She invited
Understanding
it. Her
flashed in
silvery
her
light
eyes.
flowed into him.
She didn't
not
command
as an
his
invasion,
power,
but as a
she
healing
invited
tide.
it.
Her
It
silvery
coursed through
light
his
flowed
veins,
into him,
meeting
not
the
as an
corruption
invasion,
and washing it
but
away
as a
in a
healing
wave of
tide.
pure cleansing
It
energy.
coursed through his veins.
His amber light
meeting
did not
the corruption
extinguish,
and washing it
it
away in a
ignited,
wave of
purified
pure
and
cleansing
magnified
energy.
by hers.
His amber
Their
light did not
combined
extinguish.
power, no
It
longer
ignited,
silver and amber,
purified
but
and
a brilliant
magnified
blinding
by
white
hers.
gold. Their combined
Shot down
power,
through his body,
no longer
into the
silver
earth,
and amber,
directly
but a
into the
brilliant
heart of the
blinding
prison.
white gold.
The entity
shot
screamed,
down through his body,
a sound of
into
rage
the
and
earth,
terror that shook the
directly
castle
into the heart of the
foundations.
prison.
The
It fought
entity
back,
screamed,
but it was
a
no
sound
match
of
for the
rage and
power
terror
of a
that shook the
reconciled
castle
faded
foundations.
bonds.
This
It
was
fought
not a
back,
seal made of
but it was
force
no
and
match
domination,
for the power of a
like the
reconciled,
original
faded bond.
This was a seal
This
made
was
of
not a
healing,
seal made of
forgiveness,
force and
and
domination.
love.
The
The
violet
original.
purple rift
This
sealed
was
over
a
with a
seal
sound
made of
like
healing,
a deep, final
forgiveness,
chord.
and love.
The pounding
The
heartbeat
violent
from
purple
below
rift
ceased.
sealed over with a
The
sound
oppressive
like a
weight
deep,
that had hung
final
over the
chord.
Black Fong
The
Dominion for
pounding
generations
heartbeat from
lifted
below
instantly.
ceased.
As
The
the
oppressive
white gold
weight
light
that had
faded,
hung over the Black
Aldrich
Fong
and
Dominion
Celine
for
slumped into
generations
each other's
lifted
arms.
instantly.
Exhausted
As the
but
white gold light
victorious,
faded,
they held
Aldrich
on
and
to one
Celine
another,
slumped into each other's
breathing
arms.
heavily.
Exhausted
and all
but
around
victorious,
them, a miracle
they held on to
unfolded.
one another.
The creeping
breathing
violet light
heavily,
that had marred the land
and all
began to
around them,
recede like a
a
tide
miracle
pulling back from
unfolded.
shore.
The
The
creeping
corrupted
violet
silver
light
wood
that had
sighed
marred
as
the
the
land
darkness
began to
drained from
recede
their
like a
bark,
tide pulling
their
back
leaves
from a
shimmering
shore.
anew in the
The
moonlight.
corrupted silver
The
wood
very
sighed as
air
the
felt
darkness
cleaner,
drained from their bark.
lighter.
Their leaves
The prison
shimmering
was
anew
sealed,
in the moonlight.
not just
The very
contained,
air felt
but
cleaner,
healed at its source.
lighter.
The
Aldrich
prison
looked at
was
Celine,
sealed,
his
not
warden,
just contained,
his partner,
but
his love.
healed at its source.
There were no words
Aldrich
adequate
looked at
for
Celine,
the moment. His warden,
He
his
simply
partner,
rested his
his
forehead
love.
against hers.
There were no
Their
words
shared breath
adequate
a
for the
quiet
moment.
promise in the sudden blessed
He simply
peace.
rested his forehead against hers. Their shared breath a quiet promise in the sudden blessed peace. Chapter 11 Healing. The scar on Aldrich's arm, once a pulsing violet blight, had faded. In its place was a silvery, faintly glowing mark, a delicate, intertwining pattern of moonlight and wolf tracks. It was not a wound, but a testament. A symbol of his bond with Celine, his queen, his warden. He looked out over the courtyard, where the citizens of the Black Fong Dominion had gathered. They stood not with fear or trepidation, but with curiosity and hope. For generations, they had known only silence. Today they would know truth. Celine stood beside him, her hand resting on his forearm, her presence a steady anchor. She wore a gown of moonlight silver, her crown a delicate circlet of intertwined silver and jasmine blooms, the same flowers that marked her warden's magic. She was no longer hidden, no longer just a maid, a protector in the shadows. She was his queen, not by title alone, but by destiny. This kingdom, Aldrich began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard, has endured much. For centuries, we have lived under the shadow of a secret, a lie that shackled us even as it protected us. The crowd murmured, a ripple of confusion and unease moving through them. Aldrich continued, his tone steady but infused with a quiet strength. Our ancestors built this kingdom not knowing the truth. We were not cursed by a monster. We were defending against one. And though the burden of that defense fell heavily on us, I stand before you today not with defeat, but with triumph. The prison is sealed, not through force or fear, but through trust, faith, and the strength of unity. He turned to Celine, gesturing for her to step forward. She did so gracefully, her expression calm but radiant. This woman, Aldrich said, his voice softening, Celine Vera, was not just my protector. She was my partner in this fight. She is our warden, but she is also my queen. Her light healed not only me, but our land. His gaze swept over the crowd. Today we begin a new era. One built not on hidden lies, but on truth. On protection, not secrecy. On trust, not fear. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound swelling like a tidal wave. Celine's cheeks flushed faintly, but she held herself with a quiet dignity. She turned to Aldrich, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. Later that day, in the castle gardens, the mood is lighter, celebratory. Raven leaned against a silverwood tree, her arms crossed, but her expression was softer than usual. I'll admit, she said, glancing at Kale, I didn't think we'd pull it off. Kale chuckled, his usual stoicism replaced by a rare, relaxed smile. Neither did I. But here we are. Elora stood nearby, her hands clasped before her, her expression serene. "The moon goddess works in mysterious ways," she said. "But she always delivers." Melis, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, a proud gleam in her eye. "And now we rebuild. Together." The scene lingers on this united circle. Aldrich's hand clasping Celine's, Raven sharing a rare laugh with Kale, and Elora watching over them like a guardian of the sacred. The wounds of the past were not forgotten, but they were healing. The kingdom, once fractured by secrets, now stood united in truth. Chapter 12. Beneath a Guardian Moon. The silver comb, the first gift he had ever given her, gleamed in his palm as he worked. Tonight, he didn't just braid her hair. He wove strands of luminous silver thread through it, each one catching the moonlight like liquid starlight. It was a ritual, a quiet claiming, but also a surrender. His fingers, usually so sure in battle or command, trembled slightly with the weight of the intimacy. Celine closed her eyes, her shoulders relaxing under his touch. "You've gotten better at this," she murmured, a smile in her voice. Aldrich huffed a soft laugh, his breath warm against the nape of her neck. "I've had an excellent teacher." She turned her head just enough to glance at him over her shoulder. "Liar. You were terrible at first." He met her gaze, his amber eyes softened with affection. "And yet you let me keep trying." She reached back, her fingers brushing his knee. "Some things are worth patience." Aldrich's arm, once marred by corruption, now marked with the silvery imprint of their bond, curled around Celine's waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "It's quiet," he murmured. Celine smiled. "For now." He knew what she meant. The entity was sealed, but the duty of guardianship would never truly end. There would always be rifts to mend, shadows to ward away. But they would face them, not as king and warden, not as alpha and mate, but as partners. Equals. "Do you ever wonder," Aldrich began, his voice low, "what would have happened if we hadn't found our way back to each other?" Celine tilted her face up to the moon, her skin bathed in its glow. "No," she said simply. "Because we did." A pause. Then, softer. "Our greatest weakness, fear, jealousy, became our greatest strength when we chose to face it together." Aldrich pressed a kiss to her temple, his lips lingering. No words were needed. The moon above them, guardian and guide, shone down on the kingdom they had saved, and the love that had saved them.